I was a volunteer soldier, so I understand completely if you get out and you can't find a job after all the promises they made for education and help getting a job, doesn't give you an impetus to tell anybody to, oh yeah, you gotta sign up.
Yeah, no, I agree. And the other solution to this, you can't just end it with the spending. I believe it's a spending-driven problem, but you have to grow this economy. We have to get people back to work. The more people we can get back to work,
Full-time, 40 hours.
full-time, 40 hours, solid jobs, and we start building it here, selling it there. That's a model we believe in, working towards being the co-chair of the manufacturing caucus down in Washington on a bipartisan basis. You start doing that, you get more people off of this dependency cycle and this dependency, this government type of burden, and you get people who are contributing to the system and less demanding of the system. To me, that's the winning combination.
It seems to me when Congress is trying to act, that our president pulls a diversionary tactic. The red line, all the different things. I mean, the budget was important, but he's off on something else. And it doesn't make sense to me.
Well, one of the frustrating things that Supervisor I have down in Washington, and it goes back to the other point about what people are seeing, just Nathan is talking about what he's seeing, is there's a lot of commitment in DC, a lot of time, I should say, to people trying to play politics. It's 24 hours a day, it's the gotcha politics. We got Sheila here from the Democratic Party taping everything, looking for that gotcha moment and all that type of stuff. But we believe in what we're doing. I have no problem. I say what I feel, and speak very clearly. And so that can be a real problem, because if you put politics over good policy and having that debate on policy, you end up just spinning your wheels and you don't get anywhere done. And we got to get past that.
How do you change the culture in Washington, D.C.? I mean, if you pass this new CR without funding Obamacare,
Yeah.
very reason not going to bring it to the floor.
Don't be so sure about that.
If he does, Obama's probably not going to sign it. They're going to veto it.
Don't be so sure about that. Because what we're not talking about defunding, we're talking about delaying it.
Feeling.
Yeah, which is different. It will defund it. Just to be clear, it will defund it, but it will also delay it for a year. There's a lot of folks on the other side that recognize that if this thing goes live, this is going to be a real problem.
They
just
won't
had
be
me-
reelected.
Obama just had a meeting
Now
with
you're onto something, Supervisor, that maybe we have figured out a way to potentially get
They're
a
gonna pass the
forward
14 vote.
to get it to the finish line.
Obama just had the meeting with the union leaders Friday afternoon at 3:15, where it was.
And there's a lot of people. Mr. Hoff's letter got a lot of attention from the Teamsters.
Which
It had a
I
real
don't understand. Where were these people 2 or 3 years ago? They should have seen that coming. Melissa was deals made,
Well,
deal
it was
promised
like
to vote.
Mrs. Pelosi with her, you got to let
Pass
pass
it, see
it.
what's in it.
And so this, I think, is something that we'll see. I mean, I can't guarantee you that we know what's going to happen or that it's going to have the ability to get to the finish line. But from my perspective, it's something that keeps the government open for a year. It then also gives an opportunity to have a further debate on this issue. And let's have it. Let's have the debate. And we also have to talk about health care again in America. Because if you love the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, I will tell you there's a lot of people, both sides of the aisle, independent groups, that say we still have to get to the root cause of the issue of what's causing these healthcare costs to go through the roof. Obamacare, Affordable Care Act, in my opinion, the priority was to get all the uninsured into the insurance roll, and they did that by that mandate. And you left on the table for further action is how are we going to contain these costs? And that debate has to happen again across America. And what I'm trying to be a voice of and get to the point of how do you change DC is really don't go out there and throw bombs. Don't go out there and look for your 2 seconds on Fox News or Rachel Maddow or all those things. And trust me, we've been invited on all those shows. And we just say, no, and they're like, we want you to do this, we want you to throw the bomb. I'm like, man, got the wrong guy, we're not going to do that. But have a substantive conversation about solutions. And we'll continue to do that. We've had, we joined the No Labels group. A lot of guys on my side got all fired up with us. And I said, look, I'm not walking away from my principles. What I'm trying to demonstrate is lead by example to say, let's sit in a room and let's start talking. And you know what you find when you do that? When you really honestly do that and have that honest conversation, invariably, after the first 15 minutes of yelling at each other, even if you're still doing that, you start talking, you go, oh, we agree. At the end of the day, we're all Americans. We fundamentally get that. And that changes the culture, and that changes the tone. And more that's happening as we speak in D.C. And hopefully that continues. You don't read about that. You don't see that in the news because it doesn't sell news.
Where are we headed with what are your goals as far as changing energy policy here, especially in the Northeast, for our country?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think we need a comprehensive energy policy, which we don't have. We kind of have this. We have this ad hoc type of energy proposals, if you would, or policies. And we need to have a concerted, comprehensive energy policy that's short, mid, and long term in its nature. On the short and mid-term sides, we've been supportive of developing our natural gas reserves and our oil reserves here in America through our shale and tight sands formation. I think that needs to be recognized and part of this solution. But then you also have to look at the long-term vision of getting to a system where you do have clean, alternative, endless supplies of energy. And we've stood for appropriate things like the production tax credit when it comes to wind and alternative energies, to say that this is something that has a national security implication, and we should be promoting and trying to develop those technologies that get us to that point. But I am not an individual who is like some of the folks that want to immediately say all fossil fuels have to be shut down. We can't develop our natural gas reserve. We can't develop our oil reserves here in North America, and we need to jump to alternatives and renewables immediately. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And when I talk to manufacturers, when I'm trying to build it here and sell it there and stand for policies that do that, I can tell you, yeah, there's a role for wind, geothermal, solar, maybe on a residential home, maybe on other areas. But if you're going to melt glass, if you're going to cut steel, you're going to need much more energy than that. And that's where I think recognizing also that in this energy plan, there are silos for each energy utility that's out there, and matching it up, that makes sense to me. But saying we're going to go all in on alternatives and renewables right now, just to me, I think is not viable.
Do you think it's imperative that we get after a stronger approach on fossil fuels to avoid the implementation? And if I'm not mistaken, they are building nuclear plants. Are they not building new nuclear plants? A couple of them have been, I don't know if they've been approved, but the approach has been taken for the Nuclear Regulatory Committee, and they're looking over plans and getting ready to build some more. Is that correct?
Well, ever since the incident in Japan, nuclear pretty much has been chilled, just because of the situation in Japan. But having a comprehensive energy policy has to recognize that there are different sources of energy production out there, and there has to be part of that plan. So if you're talking about power production through natural gas, for example, to me, I think that is something that's very doable right now, given the nature of the reserves that we've identified.
There's one
And
problem
I think,
with that, though.
yeah, what's that?
The natural gas companies make more money selling it overseas than they do here.
Well, that's a good point, and that's a whole nother debate, whether or not to export it. And I'll tell you one thing we're interested in.
They're building the big plants down in Louisiana just for exporting natural gas.
You know the interesting thing about that too, most of those plants were being built for imports.
Right.
And now we're exporting it potentially, and and there's a whole debate going on in that arena. There are permits that are in the pipeline that are going down that path. But one thing I'm interested in doing as we go down this path is when we export the natural gas, if we get to that point, and that really is something we do as a nation, putting a fee on that export, so that the people that are buying that exported fuel, foreigners, a lot of this will go to China and other areas because of their need that they need. Having that fee go into this highway trust fund and this infrastructure money that's needed in America. Why is that attractive to me? Because then you're using foreign dollars, not US taxpayer money, to rebuild America's infrastructure.
Well, one
So that's
thing
something to consider.
always, that kind of bothers me with this natural gas, they use so much water, and they're getting it out of rivers. That water doesn't belong to gas companies, that belongs to the people of whatever state or whatever region. And they're basically getting it for nothing, as far as I know.
Well, yes and no. There are a lot of people who are making tremendous, in the states where the gas is being developed, Pennsylvania. Susquehanna River Basin Commission, for example, monitors a lot of the withdrawals in the areas where that gas is being developed, and there's permit fees and other expenses that go with it. But this is why having appropriate oversight on it to make sure it's done safely and responsibly is something we're not opposed to, and I believe the states are best suited to make those determinations. And so that when you use the water, you don't do it in such a way that destroys the water or removes the water. That's critical to our future.
Then we have the residues, I'm not sure what it is, coming from Pennsylvania up to New York State landfills.
Yeah, a lot of what you're referring to are the cuttings that come from the natural gas development. Now, those cuttings are, the landfills are generating a tremendous amount of local tax dollars and revenue to the owners of those landfills. So that has to be taken into consideration. And
Pennsylvania doesn't want that stuff. Why would New York State?
well, no, it's going in places in Pennsylvania. It's going in both. It's not as if it's just being exported and don't put it in our backyard type of thing. It's definitely being deposited there.
And yet, New York State won't let us have gas leases.
Yeah,
But they'll take in somebody else's.
somebody else's thing. Yeah, and that's a question for Albany, and we'll let Albany make their decision on it. But I would think after 5 years of studying the issue, we could make a decision.
Should be memorized.
What's
Yeah,
that?
Should be
resign.
memorized by now.
You think he would decide or resign, one or the other?
Gotta make a decision.
Oh, he's gonna run for
vote counts.
president.
Yeah, there we go.
Maybe they don't know which way the wind's blowing yet.
It's not probably not too far off there.
On this ethanol,
Yeah.
is it true that it costs more to produce a gallon of ethanol?
Yeah, and I'm glad to report to you that the ethanol
And that's not even
subsidy.
taking in all the aquifers that you're sucking out.
Yeah,
So where's the advantage of that?
Yeah, I agree. The time for ethanol is the ethanol subsidies, in particular, are coming to an end, and that's what makes ethanol production viable. Is the subsidies that are going with
It
it.
makes the food cost
Food
more.
costs go up to the roof, and enough is enough.
Why can't people see that in Washington?
There's a lot of us that are, and that's why I
I
think
mean,
the
dumb
ethanol
guys
subsidies.
like me can see that.
You're not a dumb guy. You're definitely not a dumb guy. You're onto something. Common sense will tell you that those costs are going to, higher
Maybe-
corn prices are going to lead
Maybe
to higher
they need
food
a
prices.
common sense school down there.
I agree with that. I agree.
You need to go down
But
and
I-
teach
It's a
them
requirement
things.
for freshman Congress people.
Yeah. And that's where I think the turnover is good. That's why I think what happened in 2010 has been positive as an overall, because you've had a tremendous amount of turnover in the institutions, and that's good. You get new ways of thinking of things. You get you turn it up a little bit.
Get rid of professional politicians.
Amen.
I
Amen.
hear term limits.
I'm supportive of term limits,
Term
but
limits?
that's actually, I'm supportive of term limits, and I think that's something that should be seriously considered. And there's one way to do it. I mean, I publicly say it. I mean, I've had so many tapes of me saying that over the years. When we get to that term limit period of time, I'm sincere. I mean what I say. I'm done. If I can't do it in the 12 years, that was the term that we came up with, because it's 2 Senate terms and the president's 8 years. To me, that's, and people want me to continue to go back to Washington, but after 12 years, I mean, let somebody else try. Keep moving it, turn the body over, keep the institution going.
Yeah, and that frees you up to run for governor here.
It's,
If you're a lobbyist in Washington, do you have to pay any fees or licensing or registration, anything like that?
You know, I think you have to, you do have to be registered, but I don't know fees or anything like that.
Maybe they could fund the highway.
Yeah, highway trust fund. That's not a bad idea. Isn't that a bad idea? Maybe we can talk about that.
Well, there's gotta be plenty of money flowing around down there.
And they throw out enough crap that we could blacktop a lot of highway.
Yeah,
That's good. That's good.
and maybe it would work better than blacktop.
It's slippery.
It might, yes, well, it might stick better.
So, well, you're giving me some creative ideas to take back to Washington.
Well, while you're planting stuff on the side of highways, they ought to plant something that doesn't require mowing and that honeybees like. That's my suggestion.
Well, the state of Texas, LBJ's wife, Lady Bird, had a program where they planted huge 50 and 75 mile long sections of the median strips with wildflowers. They look like weeds for about half the summer, and then they come up wildflowers. And he's right, that's a good thing. The bees come in and they really do a wonderful job of pollinating. There's only one problem. Have you ever hit a swarm of bees at 65 miles an hour?
Yeah.
That'll slow you right up. I've seen people
Yeah,
go right in the ditch when you see
Then the
it.
county come along and cut down my goldenrod alongside the road.
But, yeah, I agree with him. There are a lot of plantings and things. They have grass now that only gets like 6 inches tall, and it doesn't need mowed. If you mow it, it grows harder. I think along with the DOT, you really need to bring in the conservation department to, you know, give them some direction on, you know, how wide the median should be, especially when we're trying to bring down insurance costs. So instead of planting stuff along the road that deer love to eat so that they're out there, you plant things along the road that deer don't like to eat, and that keeps them off the road. And the conservation could give some good direction, the conservation department could give some good direction on what kind of things should be alongside the road. I mean, bring in somebody who knows rather than asking a bunch of guys that work on the roads.
Well, you gotta remember the conservation department at one time thought Multiflora Rose was
Oh,
really great.
Well, everybody makes mistakes.
And
My
you're-
wife voted
you're-
for Obama, so I know everybody makes mistakes. And she'll admit to it.
And I remember that mistake every time I'm out hunting and walk through a area of
Some will get big
Oh.
enough to get 2x4s out.
That's so painful. I get stuck in there all the time. Anyway, I digress. Anything else?
Is anything gonna be done about I guess last year when they hit the debt ceiling, 2 years ago? They talked about the redundancy in the government, duplication, and cutting costs that way.
There is a lot of effort on that front, and it's part of the waste, fraud, and abuse efforts. When you say duplication, it's kind of a waste type of issue. There's a lot of us that are focusing on that, and we're making some headway. I mean, we really are making some headway because if you look at the discretionary spending, the defense spending, you know, we're coming down on those things. We have some interest. We co-sponsored a bill on strategic sourcing in the procurement offices. Because just take the military, for example. It seems as if the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, they have their own little silos of acquisitions and procurement. You can do that in a much more strategic, cost-effective manner if you each have one type of procurement policy rather than 3. So there's duplications of services there. That has some merit and I think has the ability to go forward. We have the no adding, no padding bill that we've dropped, that we've authored. What that means is essentially no longer will we assume the baseline of what you spent the year before is kind of off limits. You just kind of get it, and then you get an automatic increase based off of what that baseline is. It's essentially a zero-based budgeting type of reform. I think that has some merit and some ability to go forward. That will rein in the redundancies because now you're looking at the whole operation of each department annually and each area annually, and so hopefully we'll get that done. But with the debt ceiling, this is going to be, we got to get through the continuing resolution because it looks like the debt ceiling is going to be hit sometime mid-October, beginning of November at the latest. And so we had to figure out what are we going to do about it. And one thing that I have said and that I'm committed to is if what we're asked to vote on is just maintain the status quo, you know, just, and President Obama has made this request is, oh, you guys already spent this money, there's no reason for the debt ceiling, just give me a blanket relief on the debt ceiling for whatever amount or in perpetuity. To me, that's preserving the status quo, and we would be voting against that. But that being said, what we need to do is focus on ways to get people to the table, implement those reforms that are going to get the spending under control so that the need for future debt ceiling reliefs are less and less, because now you're getting on a trajectory where you're balancing the budget. That, to me, is the trick. So stay tuned. Are there reforms out there that potentially are of interest in regards to that debt ceiling negotiation? Sure. You know, entitlement reforms, you got some crises that are developing on the entitlement side right as we speak. Everyone's pretty well aware of the Medicare insolvency date, about 2024, plus or minus. Social Security itself, about 2033 is the insolvency bankruptcy date. Give you one that's even sooner. Social Security disability. Do you know when that goes insolvent? 2016. So anybody receiving a Social Security disability check in America, 2016, they're looking at an automatic 20% cut in their disability payments. That's a real problem. I mean, we see these things coming. We should be solving them. So if you got something in there like entitlement reform, tax reform, we do a lot of work on the Ways and Means Committee. Tax code, 70,000 plus pages, needs to be reformed completely, rewrite of the tax code. If there's something there to change that, that's a reform that really gets to making us competitive, making us doing things much better, that we'd be interested in considering. There's always the cuts, so to speak, but you're really getting, when you're talking, because you're starting to see some things when you're talking about discretionary cuts in particular. I always go to this because it's a pie chart of how we spend our $3.6 trillion. You know, this is discretionary spending. Defense has been significantly reduced. But if you really don't get into the mandatory spending lines and the entitlement spending lines of Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, I mean, just take these pieces right here. You're really, and for the last, since 2010, since we got to Washington, these have been cut. These have been downsized. So you really got to get to how do you get to these other areas of spending and reforming them. So that's something to look at potentially with the debt ceiling debate.
Who's responsible for rewriting, and when you start, when you actually get somebody to say, okay, we're going to do this, who would be responsible for rewriting the tax code?
Generally, under the Constitution, it originates in the House, okay? So the Ways and Means Committee, the committee I serve on, we are charged, that's our jurisdiction, is rewriting the tax code. And then our Senate counterparts, because remember how it originates in the House, but it's got to be signed by the Senate and or passed by the Senate, signed into law by the President. Mm-hmm. That's the Senate Finance Committee, and that's right now the chairman of that is Max Baucus.
So is there a possibility, because I know that this will scare every politician in the world, is there a possibility that you could actually get an independent, completely government independent entity to concoct and create a new tax code out of the old tax code for some kind of perusal by the committees? Because what we hear each time is basically the same committees are working on them, and they're still all holding on to what they think is important individually instead of approaching the whole thing. Every time I've ever heard anyone talk about rewriting the tax code, they have a little chunk that they want to rewrite, not the whole thing.
Yeah, see, that's the difference now.
And that's what I'm trying to understand is there a possibility that someone who doesn't have anything that they want to hold on to can actually approach this as a straight out plain issue and try and get somewhere with it? Because like I said, if you've got, if you've got a little piece and he's got a little piece that you want to hold on to and then change the other part, it never will get there.
Yeah. Well, I give a lot of credit to our chairman, Dave Camp, on Ways and Means, because he has approached it sincerely from, we are going to take the clean sheet of paper and we're just going to rebuild this thing from the bottom all the way up. And Max Baucus has agreed in the Senate to take that same approach. So that is a totally, you're absolutely right. A lot of times when they've gone at this before, they've looked at the code and they've taken the old code and they said, okay, what works, what doesn't work, and we'll just kind of work off of that. We'll use that as the base model. We're taking a completely different approach. We had 11 working groups split up on the committee. We met with all the different stakeholders. We met in public. We traveled around the country and talked with people, brought in ideas of what is good tax policy. If you had the ability to write the code today, what kind of code would you write? And that's what we're doing. And so we're building it from the bottom up, clean sheet of paper. If your suggestion is we delegate this outside of these committees and into independent groups, there's some problems with doing that, in my opinion, that I would see, because what you're doing is then sending it essentially to an unelected group of people that aren't going to be held accountable by the public, and you could see that same interest bias that you're concerned about infiltrating those groups and potentially having the ability not to check that independent process. So I think what we're committed to, what I'm committed to, start from the bottom up. You're going to see a product here probably in the next, don't hold me to it, but in the next few months, by the end of the year, we'll have a product out of the house that will reflect that type of approach to it. And as we do it, there are 3 principles that are guiding me and guiding us essentially on the committee. We're going to take this code and we're going to make it simple, we're going to make it fair, and we're going to make it competitive from a private sector point of view. And we're going to do the whole thing, both individual and corporate. Because there's a lot of folks that just want to do corporate, and the White House is one of them. The White House, if you watch this issue or study this issue, there's been indications from the White House about we just want to do corporate. We want to do corporate reform only. Now we're getting some indications that they're willing to go beyond that, because I think they recognize the politics that they're boxed in on, because you can't defend the status quo. The tax code is broke. Second, if you go into a group of folks and you say, if I came here today and I said, okay, we're going to reform the corporate code, and by that we mean we're going to reduce the rates, we're going to clean up this corporate code, what are you sending to the small businesses that are pass-through entities that are treated as individuals? And to individuals say, yeah, we're going to take care of the corporations, but we're not going to take care of you individually. That's wrong. It's not the right thing to do, and we're not going to do it. So there's some, I'm very hopeful. Now, will it get to the finish line?
It certainly wouldn't work.
Yeah. And will it get to the finish line? You know, where the Senate passes, we get a House Senate bill on the floors of both, because though Max Baucus in the Senate Finance Committee is committed to it, Harry Reid is pretty much doing whatever he can to put some road mines in the way to get it to the floor of the Senate. And that's a problem. And then if the White House isn't going to sign it, it's going to veto it, that's a problem too. So we need some clear indications yet as to whether or not there's an opportunity to get to the finish line. But we're working on it. All right. Well, we appreciate everyone coming out today. And I really appreciate it. We got some sunlight left. We can get the chores done. I have my daughter has her homecoming dance tonight, so we're going to be able to get home in time. We weren't sure if we were going to make it, Joseph, but it looks like we may be able to take photos of her and her little, she's a sophomore in high school. I will not use the term boyfriend. That is something I will not do.
Her friend.
Her friend, who happens to be a boy.
It's getting a little nervous, huh?
Thanks, guys. Thank you very much. Thanks, Supervisor. To our town hall. Have a seat. Make yourself comfortable. This is our 4th one of the day, and it's a beautiful day out there. So I'm sure people had other things to go to, but I appreciate you coming here today. Before we get started, I want to thank the town for opening up the town hall, post office, library, 3-in-1, and opening it up to us to have these conversations. These have been important. Maybe also introduce some people to you. Joe, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? And,
I'm Joseph Winslow, Congressman Reed's staff in the Congressional District. Half our staff's in Washington, half our staff's in New York, and I run the office here.
Sharon?
Sharon Murphy. I am the Congressman's Executive Assistant and District Scheduler.
So they work out of the Corning office primarily, but if you need anything and you talk to people in the office, those are the faces. associated with the voices and the names. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Maybe just a quick update from Washington, and then we'll open it up to the conversation, whatever you want to talk about. A lot of attention and time has been on Syria. We have a little handout that we're giving to people today, kind of like a background type document as to Syria. As you may or may not know, I am opposed to going into Syria. I have firmly committed myself not to intervene into Syria. There's a whole slew of reasons, but right now I just don't see what's in America's interest to get involved in that battle. And also, it really hasn't been laid out very clearly to me as to what happens next. What is Plan B? What is Plan C? What is Plan D? And if this thing escalates, which I think it would, how are you going to deal with it? And that just hasn't been laid out, in my opinion, and that comes with a huge amount of risk if there's not a big Plan B or C. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I heard different things on this. I heard one time that there would be no boots on the ground. And then I heard that the CIA has already had their fingers in the pie.
Yeah, there's a lot of different stories out there, I guess. But we going in to Syria, boots on the ground, not boots on the ground, limited airstrikes like the president was asking and wants to do. To me, it's just not in our interest to do, and we'll continue to be opposed to it. Now, that doesn't mean if the situation changes. You got a situation like if there's an attack on Israel or on Americans or on American interests, that's a whole different situation. But right now, seeing what we're dealing with, I just don't see it being in our interest to get involved. And when we deal with our sons or daughters or brothers or sisters or mothers and fathers, when we're talking about our military, I take that decision very seriously and not lightly. So, but I appreciate that, and I'm not aware of any operations or anything that are on the ground in Syria. There is this decision the president has made to arm the rebels, so maybe that's what you're referring to. Maybe some weapons. Yeah. So maybe that's where that's coming from. But.
Well, maybe he's saying boots on the ground as military, as opposed to boots on the ground CIA.
Could be. I don't know. I'm not aware of any operations that are there. But.
Maybe he wouldn't be.
Could be.
Wrong party.
Could be. So we'll keep to monitoring it. I know the Russians and Kerry just met and negotiated a deal. We'll see how that goes. If it leads to the chemical weapons being destroyed, okay, that's great. That's one of the risks that I do see in that area that we need to be aware of and diligent on. But let's see how this thing unfolds, and we'll leave it there. So rather than going on and on and on, I mean, might as well see what's on your mind and open it up and go from there. I mean, there's a lot going on in D.C. We got the continuing resolution, which is the government shutdown, coming up here in the next couple of weeks, October 1st. If there's not a decision made and the president signing into law, the government potentially will shut down. We've signed on to a resolution yesterday to fund the government for a year, but in exchange for that, we delay Obamacare for a year. I think that is a prudent step to take. I think delaying this thing, as Affordable Care Act, coming down the pipeline, I think is a step in the right direction, and I think it's something to avoid the train wreck, as Max Baucus on the other side of the aisle likes to call it, that's coming down the pipeline. There's a lot of problems. And then also, I think there's a reason to have a debate across America. The president has said we're going to waive it for businesses, employers, and we're not going to waive it for individuals. So if it's good for business, why isn't it good for individuals? And so from my perspective, let's delay the whole thing and get into the debate and see where we can go with it.
That's mainly why I'm here is, what do you know about the Veterans Health Plan? Is there such a thing?
Veterans Health Plan. I know when you're talking about TRICARE, what are you?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, the veterans have a health plan, especially retirees. 20-year retirees. They get TRICARE. It's called TRICARE. It's the general term for it. And so I know there's a huge backlog in the veterans benefits that maybe you're referring to too, that we're trying to put a spotlight on and correct. But
Well, I kinda got the impression that there was like some sort of health plan for veterans that would take the place of some other national health plan. I'm not sure what the qualifications are needed.
for it. Not familiar with what you may be referring to, other than what veterans receive, and through the VA and through TRICARE. So there's nothing I'm aware of where they're going to take veterans, TRICARE, and the VA services and kind of apply that on a national level to all Americans. So if you're hearing something like that, I haven't seen anything like that.
I heard on the news today that the Air Force, the personnel can't get free flu shots this year because of the sequester.
The sequester coming down. That may be.
That seems
we're
totally
looking at.
ridiculous.
We're looking at these cuts that we're talking about, the sequestration cuts that are going into effect. There is a better way to do these cuts, in my opinion. Now, remember where the cuts are coming from, though. We do have to get our fiscal house in order
Oh, I agree.
in America. That debt path that we're on is just not sustainable, 17 trillion. And these cuts have taken a step in the right direction in downsizing the federal government. But I'm very interested in working with folks, how to reallocate those cuts, how to do them in a smarter fashion. But downsizing the government is something I'm interested in being a voice for. Yeah.
My name's Nick.
Yeah, Nick.
As far as the Syrian thing, I have a statement that I like to make.
Sure, please.
We just said the pledge, and for my whole life, at the end of that, it has said liberty and justice for all. And all I hear nowadays is liberty and justice for me. The rest of you can go to wherever. And that's what I hear right now. I'm hearing someone say, we're just going to stay out of it. Let it go. And that always ends up being too late. Now, back to what you were talking about with the sequester and the debt and so forth. Have the Congress really, has it taken on foreign aid? Has it taken on that situation? Because I see a great place to cut the budget. We're sending money to China, who owns a huge chunk of our debt. And why are we sending money to a country who's sitting over there buying up our debt with it? That doesn't make any sense. I'm looking at the foreign aid bills, and I'm seeing that we're buying the loyalty, if for lack of a better way to describe it, of most of Africa, most of South America, and a huge portion of Asia and Southeast Asia. That's insane. We're giving our largest amount of money to a country that doesn't even want us there. Pakistan and Afghanistan, they're telling us go away. Now I understand why we're trying to hang on to Pakistan. They got nuclear weapons and we're scared to death they're going to give them to the wrong people. I get that, I'm not an idiot, but billions and then have them tell us go away? We've got to take on some issues that haven't been approached in quite a while. Now I voted for you, and I voted Republican, and we have a strong Republican Congress, but we're not getting anywhere, and it's like everybody's spending all their time fighting over Obamacare, and we're not actually getting the job that we sent you up there to do, and that is cut the stinking budget. I understand that, everybody keeps trying to say we need tax cuts. Cut the taxes. We don't need to cut the taxes. We're used to living with that. Cut the spending so that the taxes go where they're supposed to go. Another place that I've been doing a lot of research over the last 6 months the biggest waste of money that I've seen our country make is the federal and state prisons and corrections system. That is a toilet that gets flushed every day, and it's just sucking money in. And nobody addresses that. They say, well, we're going to cut spending, we're going to reduce employees. Then they say, well, we've got to increase employees because we've got more people going into jail. We've got to change the way the prisons and the corrections systems work. And that requires somebody addressing the way the laws work. Who's getting thrown in jail, for how long, and why? I understand that kind of falls back into local level, but doesn't the federal government kind of set the standard? I mean, the federal prison system is what the states kind of look at for how they're going to operate their criminal and penal system. Mm-hmm. And I don't think we're getting there. Mm-hmm. I mean, what is it, $7 billion was the prison budget request this year? Maybe it was 8. It's right in there someplace.
I don't know what that number is.
It's 6.8 or 7 billion, I think, for the 2014 budget to go to the prison system. I don't understand why I'm paying huge amounts of money to feed, clothe, and house criminals when what I want to do is help students in schools and students trying to get into colleges and people getting out of college and trying to go to work and their medical problems, because we're going to have a medical problem if we go away, and we're putting money into prisoners? What are they producing back out of the prisons?
Lawsuits.
Huh?
Lawsuits.
And
Every one
certainly
of them.
not,
My
it's,
brother works in the prison system.
and our
in New
penal
York.
system doesn't punish.
They have a complete law library, and they've all got suits, and the state pays for the legal fees.
They eat real good, they get really good health care, they've
They're
got a nice
guaranteed for
dry
their food,
place.
yeah.
And I've got a nephew who cannot get into college because he doesn't have enough money. Maybe he should go pull a federal crime and then get his education. It's absurd, and it doesn't get addressed. I spend a lot of time reading internet, I watch CNN, I watch the different channels about the goings-on in Washington, D.C. on a regular basis. I don't hear them address those issues.
Yeah.
All they want to address is sensationalism issues. Well, I know that, Syria has to be dealt with, but that doesn't give everybody in Washington the right to ignore the job. And why aren't we getting any of this done?
Well, I appreciate it. So, first of all, on your question of foreign aid, we spend about $47 billion a year in foreign aid, and I'm glad to report to you that we are decreasing our foreign aid budget, which is good, and we need to do that. Now, our biggest recipient of foreign aid is not Pakistan, it's not Afghanistan, I believe it's Israel, and about $3 billion. It's about $3 billion to Israel, and so the point I use with Israel is that there are legitimate roles for foreign aid. There are close allies that foreign aid is critical to our relationship and going forward, and we're going to continue. So you're never going to get to zero.
Right.
Is my point. So we're going to decrease foreign aid, which is good, and that's being done as we speak. It doesn't get reported on because your point about sensationalism and things like that is very apt, because the news and all news and newspapers are into, we need to sell headlines in order to sell revenue for ads and things like that, and circulation and that type of stuff. We're part of efforts to try to focus on downsizing this government. Foreign aid is one line. You talk about prisons, and I don't know what that number is off the top of my head, but I will say that there is always going to be a need for a prison system on the federal level, and the federal and the state systems are they're different. The primary focus of federal prisons focuses a lot on terrorist type activity, national security type of concerns. A lot of white collar racketeering and RICO charges go through the federal system, and the states are more focused on, in my opinion, drug, violent crime type of activity. So they're kind of a different system there between the two. So how can we get creative to get something out of those prison systems? I'm all ears. If you got a suggestion, we'd love to take it back to Washington. That's why we love doing these town halls, because we get some really good common sense ideas from people especially our people, our neighbors around the district, that we bring back to Washington. So anything we could do to generate revenue out of those prison systems, I'm interested in. I know there's things that, like we just left Allegheny County. They have a pheasants frozen. They're raising pheasants at the county jail. And what does that do in regards to revenue? They're actually starting to have hunting tours where people come up to Allegheny County to shoot those pheasants, and it's bringing money into the area. It's bringing money into the county. So that's something we're all ears in trying to figure out.
Well, I've always felt like public works programs, anytime there's a public works program, there should be prisoners working on it.
Yeah, and that's one of the, we're fighting Monterey. We went over to Monterey. You're familiar with Monterey shock incarceration? Now that's a state level type thing, but we used our voice to go over there to stand with Monterey because it's like a military boot camp type of setting. And if you ever seen the Monterey, I don't know, have they been over to Jasper, Supervisor? They have the work crews that go out. And I'll tell you, to replace what's going to be lost with those work crews by our local taxpayers is going to be significant. And so that's one of the reasons we're fighting for Monterey. Not only the type of system that's there, but what they're doing for our community. And I agree. They shouldn't just be sitting in a cell doing pretty much nothing.
Well,
Get out there.
I guess one of the things that I was directed at is the fact that we have this federally mandated 3 strikes rule for 3-time extended repeat offenders and felons. But then, and that's mandated. But then, where does the federal support come to help us at a state level cover that cost? There's nothing.
Not familiar with the state mandate of a 3-strike rule.
Isn't that an individual state?
I think that's a
decision?
state. That's a state.
Yeah, but
requirement.
didn't Bill Clinton push a federal law that said that you had to, it was a 3 strikes and you stay in prison?
There's no mandate on the states that.
Well, I thought there was.
Yeah, no, I think each state has the ability to do that.
Because I'm seeing 3-time felony counts for DUI. Okay, so now I have a drunk in prison that I'm gonna pay for the rest of his days to sit around and do nothing. And that's absurd. And that's one of the loops that why I'm saying, it seems to me that the way the federal prison system works is the state systems kind of look at the way the laws are handled and dealt with, and the federal systems of corrections works, and then they try and implement the same and like programs. And that's why I was curious about it.
Yeah. Not familiar with that, but I mean, when you say, you know, we'll have a source of disagreement here. When you say a 3-time felon drunk driver sitting in prison for an extended period of time, to me, you do 3 felony DWIs, there's a reason why you shouldn't be out on the road and have your freedom. And I will support efforts to remove those folks from society and pay not only a penalty, but for the safety of the public, make sure that they're not walking out and being free.
Well, I understand that, but what I'm trying to get at is once you put them in there, if you're not getting something productive out of them, why are we warehousing them? Okay, you didn't do a violent crime, so you keep living. But now you're going to be a drain on society inside a building with walls and fences and gates instead of outside where you're injuring people and causing all the other problems that you know would cause.
I think we definitely agree that when they're in prison, the concepts of kind of the work camps, the work teams, the work crews, making product, that type of stuff, maybe is something to consider. I think that's very.
You've got to get something back out of it other than a warehouse.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't see Walmart with empty warehouses not making money. If they've got a warehouse, it makes money for them. So, in our federal government, it needs to start running a little bit more like a business would have to run.
Well, I'm glad you said. I mean, for example, I'll give you an unrelated, but as an analogy, something we're working on in regards to our federal highway system, our highway trust fund. Right now, the money coming into the highway trust fund, it's money to build our infrastructure, our road structure in America. It's coming up significantly short of the need. It's about $39 billion that goes into the trust fund. We got about $110 billion need for infrastructure. And so the question then becomes, and it's the gasoline taxes, that's the primary source of that. I'm not supportive of raising gas taxes. I don't believe that's the right path to go. $4 a gallon at the pump, essentially, putting a higher tax on traveling Americans and people using their car on a day-to-day basis. Taxpayer can't afford it. So the question is then you got things like 100 million acres of fallow land in our interstate highway system. And by that I mean, if you look out west in particular, tremendous amount of acreage in the interstate highway system that's just sitting there. We have it locally. You have some town roads probably that you're mowing, that you're keeping off to the side and things like that. Costs you some money to do that type of maintenance. So it's a cost burden on our federal government. So what we're trying to do is get creative and say, why don't we use those 100 million of acres in an economically viable way and use that money to go into the Highway Trust Fund. We've asked the Federal Highway Department of Transportation to come back with a report on that. We're still waiting. We'll keep putting pressure on them to do that. Now, will that bridge that $60 billion shortfall, $70 billion shortfall? No. But it's a new way of looking at the problem and trying to get new ways to use underutilized property and make it productive. So as you're trying to do with the inmates in the federal penitentiaries and in our local jails, we're trying, there's a bunch of us that are trying to do that in Washington, and we'll continue to keep trying to do that. And that's where, if you guys have any ideas on that type of activity, we're all ears. We're all ears. And in the meantime, we will continue to fight the fight of downsizing this federal government, which is it's just $3.6 trillion. It's not sustainable. It's just not sustainable. And that's where we got to have the question of sequestration, and the debt and the lack of ability to cover our bills is making us have to have this conversation of where are we going to spend these dollars. And what I like to say is what America needs to engage in is a national debate of priorities. What are the priorities that we are going to fund? And then let's have that debate all the way through. And when it comes to things like national security, when it comes to things like infrastructure, I'm going to be very strongly in support of that type of effort. And when I say national security, I also mean veterans. Because you got to take care of the veterans when they're deployed and when they come back. Because if you don't have that type of commitment to our veterans, jeopardize the morale of our armed services and our men and women in the military. So it goes back to the flu shots and that type of thing that you bring up.
And if you have an all voluntary service and they don't get support when they get